from Tammy.
Yeah.
Colleen, welcome.
Thank you.
You're jumping into the deep end.
Okay.
In here, what we do is explore Medical Qigong with the goal, I mean, basically what we do is a little bit of live case study, but with the goal of focusing on the element that we're working within, like right now, kidneys. Wintertime is kidneys. So we're looking at nourishing the kidneys and understanding what the kidneys do for us and how we need to protect them and that kind of thing. We learned some Qigong practices out there related to kidneys, like there was one in that 5-element set that was kidney related. Last week we focused a little more on bones and things like that related to kidneys again. Western science fascinates me in that we explore a little bit of that as well. And there's, you know, I love it when they get new research that determines that like the kidneys and the bones are related to each other and things like that. It's like, oh, that's fascinating. I think I read that in a book about 25 years ago. But it's discovered. So, and that book was written like 4,000 years ago. So that's like that. But what we try to do here is not be cynical or condescending. We try to be explorers and just play with it. You know, I mean, it's one thing to teach it the way it's written in the books. It's one thing to be able to apply it into our day-to-day world. And that's partly what I want to do here is kind of make it more real and less complicated, less theoretical and more practical, I guess. So, what did you guys notice this week?
I learned that there was a yoga instructor's class I don't want to go to again.
Ah, still challenged by instructors.
Yes.
I appreciate you haven't thrown me to the curb yet.
Well, no, he was a really good instructor. It was not good for my back or my shoulders and neck.
Oh.
Until it was more advanced than I could handle.
And he didn't offer modifications or anything like that?
No.
Mm.
No.
No, and he only asked if everybody's back and neck was okay after the poses.
Okay.
And it was like, then it was okay until the next morning when I woke up and it was really sore for the next 2 days. And I went, not the class for me.
The biggest thing is working within your own boundaries. So if I go into a pose and to be, you know, full disclosure, I interviewed a yoga instructor here that, you know, put me in a pose and then came around and I didn't see this coming, but my head was in a protective position and she pushed it into the position she wanted, and that triggered my cervical injury. And so needless to say, she won't be teaching here, but it took me a couple of weeks to get that stabilized again. So you have to really be mindful. That's why we do so much focus on principle work and not so much on, you know, how many fancy moves can we do. It's about understanding the principles and understanding what your boundaries are within that. So, any other awarenesses this week?
Well, you said last week about the time, this is the time, the winter solstice triggers the time for the going to the cave and the whole thing. And this Christmas season has always been a horrible season for me, really. I have a huge family. They all get together in groups of, 20 to 40 people in residential homes a lot. That has always just been overwhelming for me, especially a whole bunch of those gatherings. And I told my husband, I said, I usually have a total meltdown, at least crying at least once during the Christmas season. So this year, because they're so compressed, I just said, I'm bowing out. And I didn't do the Christmas Eve with 45 people in Niece's house. And I bowed out of another one. I mean, we have our wedding anniversary is winter solstice. So we did a party on that night, but somebody else's party that already did the winter solstice party. But, it just occurs to me that's probably doesn't really, in the way that we celebrate our highest of holy days in this time frame, and we use those with big gatherings and everything else, but when by nature we want to go get in the cave, there's sort of a paradoxical alignment on that timing, I would think, even.
Well, there's a lot of paradoxical alignments when you start bringing your religion into things.
Yeah.
No matter what religion it is, not just Christianity.
Right, because this is
Well, I mean, all of
during
the,
this time
you know,
of
the
year.
whole Christmas thing was taken from pagan rituals
Yeah.
and such, and so there's the way they were meant to be, and then this came in and absconded and made it a celebration that goes a different direction. So energetically, you're right, and it's not that it's right, wrong, good, bad, it's just that there's this energy that's going into a hibernation mode, and then there's this forced energy that's going into a celebration mode.
Right, right.
And so it's a opposition, it's an opposition.
It's in opposition,
Right,
yeah.
and so when we talk about opposition, what are we talking about? Yin yang,
Mhm.
right? And so when you look at, you know, what are some yin tendencies or properties versus what are some yang tendencies or properties? Yin is dark, yang is bright. Soft, I mean, you can go into opposing hard, right? We can go on and on and on, but you can say calm and excited. That's another example.
So all good, but just opposites.
Yeah, the thing is what this describes is we live in duality. This is a dualistic state. And so, not just Texas, but just in general. So in that duality, there's a constant ebb and flow. So you can take yin yang and not only draw it that way, but you could also do this and have it doing this, a sine wave, right? There's ebbs and flows. You could also draw it like a seesaw, like that. Oppositional forces. And so one of the things that, you know, that can make the season really joyous and really painful is that opposition. You know, for me, like often this time of year we are celebrating in a sense of joy, but then there's this other side that we tend to just ignore, that is missing relatives that are gone, that maybe they're recognizing that there's more, you know, holidays behind us than in front of us. There's a lot of different emotions that come into play this time of year when we're marking a transitional phase, whether it's solstice or Christmas or Hanukkah, which, you know, that cycles around. It can be Thanksgiving. It can. But not as much Hanukkah, but like solstice and other traditions, and I'm not up on all of them, but, you know, just looking at solstice and Christmas as examples. They're transitional times. They're times of it depends on where you are in your cycle, in your own energetic cycle, as to what's coming. But the energy around us, the energy of the earth where we live on this hemisphere, now for Australian that's a whole different subject, but, you know, if we're in the southern hemisphere versus for the northern hemisphere, the energy right now is to go into hibernation. It's to go into that yin state. So we're nourishing the yin, which is why there's a focus on the kidneys. Kidneys, like I talked about last week, kidneys are our batteries. And they're part of that energy center. Liver, kidneys are part of that working cycle that gives us our energy. It purifies the body's chemistry so that we can use that energy efficiently. If we start to have kidney failure, our body becomes more and more toxic. We become less and less energized. We become weaker and weaker. Does that make sense? So we're looking to nourish the kidneys this time of year, and that comes in the if you think about kidneys, bones, and central nervous system, we're looking at nourishing deep minerals balances and such. So bone broths are really good. Warm foods. You don't want to have cold foods this time of year. Warm foods. Nothing too heavy. Unless you're Russian, then it's borscht. You know, but you're looking, and again, that becomes, you know, when you talk about the nutrition and what nourishes us, it depends on where we were born. You know, when you start looking at that as to what was available. You know, financial class can come into play, but it has a general rule as to whether you have pate or cat food. They look the same, so.
Hey, Chris, if somebody is living in the yang, say over the holidays, because they're anxiety driven and all that happening, would it be better to have cold foods to balance out the overheating that they're doing to their bodies?
That's a great question. I'm not answering that, no.
It depends, right?
It depends, it does depend. There are ways to, what you're trying to do is if you have an excess of one, you're looking to, we're gonna get real complicated real quick. An excess does not necessarily mean a deficiency on the other side. It can be excess on both, right? So that gets really complicated. But if you work, you know, kind of what we talk about with the mental, emotional, physical, if we're listening and working within our own being, you know, we get cravings related to food. We get cravings. So if you're like a woman, you know, who is pregnant with child, there are times when they crave certain foods, right? Typically, in traditional medicine, that's because their balances are off, and so the craving is trying to pull in the missing elements. Pickle craving, potassium, and sodium. Olive craving. Fame could not, I mean, if I let her loose on an olive bar when she was like this, you know, I'd still be in debt. So, you know, cravings for olives, cravings for different things, crazy cravings, you know, peanut butter and whatever. But it's the body saying, I need this, I need that. For kidneys, it's salt. And if you think about it, if I'm depleted of salt, I mean, there's a balance that's needed in the body. The kidneys are responsible for helping manage part of that salt balance. So if I'm craving salt, that means that there's an imbalance. If I have too much salt, I have a tendency to crave sweet. We can start getting into macrobiotic cooking at that point, where you're trying to get all the textures and all the flavors on the same plate, which is cool, but hard to do. So it does depend on the individual, but yeah, that is one way to do it. It's not any different. I mean, in essence, humans are looking to be here. Really, creatures, just creatures in general, are looking, anything alive is looking to be here, in balance. Not dead center, you know, but within a cycle that is reasonable. So if my cycle is doing this, I want to be in a place where things are moving smoothly. I could have ups and downs, that's fine, they can transition, but I want to be as close to center here as reasonably possible. We have a tendency to seek balance. If we're hot, what do?
Or air conditioning.
We cool down some way. You know, if you're a pig, you jump in the pool. He has his own pool. It's okay. If you're cold, you warm up. You seek warmth. If you're hungry, you seek food. If you're thirsty, you seek fluids. Right? If you're tired, you seek rest. If you're restless, you seek to move. Right? My being is, if I've been stagnant for a long time, I want to move. So we're always looking at staying within balance. And honestly, the further out on the seesaw we get, the further out of balance we get. I've only had this time in a couple of days, so it's taking a while. blah, 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 blah. So the further out on the seesaw we get, the more uncomfortable we become. The more uncomfortable we become. The more painful it is. A high level of anxiety, it's very painful. Deep sadness, depression, very painful. It's, and like I was saying out there, it's not that we don't want to ever, let's just kind of play with this here. I'm just going to redraw. It's not that we don't ever want to feel, if we didn't feel anything, we'd be here, right in the middle, right? So if I'm anxious, if I've got anxiety here, and I've got, let's just go to the opposite, depression here. Wow, okay. Anxiety here, depression here, life is going to bring in things and it's going to cycle. If we start getting into overwhelmed, then you have this, severe anxiety, severe depression kind of thing. You have this cycle. Or you could have somebody that's anxious all the time and they're idling up here. So there's always a measure of anxiety and it cycles up and down from there. Or there's always a heavy depression and it cycles up and down from here. So sometimes I'm less depressed, sometimes I'm more depressed, or sometimes I'm less anxious or more anxious, but there's always an underlying anxiety. Does that make sense? So the cycles happen wherever on the scale you are. Ideally, through our training, and the more, like in this anxiety engine here, if I'm always anxious and it's just measures of intensity, that's a very uncomfortable place to be. I'm out here on the seesaw where the swing can be significant. Right? Or same thing with depression. There's sometimes where I'm sad, but then I can go really heavy, right? So if I'm always a measure of sad, that's 80, it's supposed to be an 80 here. Okay, I've got a happy finger on that. If I'm always in that heavy depressed state and now I'm just, sometimes I'm a little better, sometimes I'm a little worse, but I'm always there, then that's that heavy depression, right? If I'm in that cycle, for example, medication pharmaceuticals, the vast majority of pharmaceuticals are comfort care. And so what can happen is if I'm having heavy swings, let me draw this, heavy swings like this, medication can come in and clamp the high end and the low end. Right? So I'm not as depressed, I'm not as anxious. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But I'm clamped in this space where I'm more, it's not changing the intensity really, it is under the covers, but this is kind of what I call a comfortably numb.
I was trying to think of how, in a bigger scale, this affects the actual universe, but it really doesn't, because there's a lot of people that during this time of year are living up at the anxiety level, but there's equal amounts probably that are living at the depression level, so it still balances it out, so it doesn't throw the whole thing off.
Yeah. And really within communities, within families, in that 40 group family, and I don't blame you at all, in that collective of family, you're going to have ebbs and flows within all of that. You're going to have some people that are really excited and some people that are just like, I don't care. They're just isolating, and others that are somewhere in between. That's just the nature, the nature of life, if you will. But now you get mob mentality, and now everybody's moving in the same direction, right? And that becomes dangerous, because then when we start getting in energetic frequencies, then that becomes a common energy that is now feeding a mentality, right? And it can escalate. But the pharmaceutical, I'm not saying that all pharma is bad or medicating depression or anxiety is bad. It's simply not a solution. It doesn't fix the underlying pain. It simply masks our ability to feel it or perceive it. In hospital, I saw so many times people would say, I'd see them again and again, and they'd come back, and it's like, what's going on? And they're well, my anxiety's gotten worse, so I need new meds. And it's like, well, as you start working with them, their life is actually better, but the medication that was prescribed to them to help them with anxiety or depression, it was pretty much saw the gamut, was no longer working because their bodies had learned to metabolize the chemistry. And so now the side effect of feeling calmer, let's just use anxiety as the platform here, if I take a medication and it helps me feel calmer, but then over 6 months, 8 months, that same dose of medication is no longer working, my body's learned to metabolize it. It's not that I'm more anxious, it's that my body no longer processes the chemical the same way, so the side effect of feeling calmer is now less. Does that make sense? Like I said, deep end. So what we're looking to do is, let's say we do take some kind of medication to kind of clamp this down, that can help us get through a rough patch. But where we really want to be able to understand this is working within this concept of quieting the mind, settle emotions, and relax the body. What we want to be able to do is, as we're working to do that, we need to figure out what's in our way. If it's anxiety, likely the mind is having trouble settling down. And then the question becomes, where am I going? So anxiety is typically future focused. Awfulizing. Fear, worry, anxiety. Ooh, kidneys, fear. Worry, anxiety, future focused. And so I could be, now I've had people, over the years I've had people say, well, I'm anxious about something that happened to me X number of years ago. Really? So I am time traveling back to a time in my life where I felt anxiety. I get that. But the anxiety that I was feeling, so let's just play time traveler here for a second. I'm here feeling an anxiety that is related to an incident that happened back here in my life. Okay? So I've had people say, my anxiety is past focused. To a point, they're correct. However, what they're doing is they're connecting with a resident energy that was very familiar to them here. And so they're time traveling back to this spot and feeling the anxiety that they felt here. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that anxiety was about the future.
You're here all day.
I'm here all day, try the veal. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Challenge me. Challenge me. If it doesn't make sense to you, if it doesn't resonate, let's talk about it. I'm not the be-all, end-all of everything.
It makes sense. I mean, if you go into a dentist office and you have anxiety, and they're not even going to do anything to you today, but you know, last year they pulled all your teeth and you know, then, you know, I mean, that literally is triggering something that happened a couple of years ago.
So in that situation with the dentist, if they pulled all your teeth, I would suggest you don't need the dentist anymore. But if you had a traumatic experience at the dentist's office a year ago and you're going back now and you have anxiety, you're resonating off of that frequency, right? You're experiencing that anxiety because that's what happened.
Even if they said just come in for your teeth to be cleaned, you know, now you're just walking in to the office. You don't
Right.
Anxious experience.
Right, and so now here, you're basically what's happening is
That you
you're
had put in.
triggering a fear. She's probably a dentist.
I'm just thinking they'd have to go in to get their gums cleaned. There'd be no teeth.
Oh yeah, so you're back
Not
on the toothless
giggling.
wonder.
Yes, sorry.
So in that, the anxiety that you're feeling in that moment at the dentist office is about what might happen, again, future. There is a familiarity and a connection to the past, but the anxiety that was felt there was about the future. Does that make sense? Now, if you were really unhappy with this dentist, then after it happened, you would have anger, and that anger would be towards the past. This happened, now I'm pissed. Well, actually, it would be, this happened, now I'm pissed. I'm glad you guys get me. So, what we're looking to do is understand, if I've got my mind racing, busy, I'm the only one on the planet that can discern what's going on there. What am I thinking about? Where's it coming from? If I don't do that work, I can't change anything. The challenge also becomes in we can get stuck. We can have such a connection to the pain, let's just stay with anxiety, I guess, that we get stuck in it. The devil we know versus the devil we don't know, which would be change. Right? I feel horrible right now, but the thought of changing to something else is scary. And so the fear of that change keeps me stuck. And typically with that, somewhere in, when we do, we talk about the trigger pattern tool scenario, got a trigger, oops, got a trigger, runs a pattern, and then we have a tool that settles it down, right? If we don't do anything else, we're just on that hamster wheel. We get triggered, run the pattern. So I got a dentist's office visit. I'm going to feel anxious about that, and then the tool would either be canceling the visit or, on the other side of it, okay, everything was good, I can calm down, right? But if we have that, if we continue to run that with whatever is triggering, for us as individuals, if we break this cycle and come in here, we have to understand what is it that I'm afraid of? What is it that I'm feeling anxious about? And the thing is it goes beyond that in the sense of, I can connect to this event back here and say, that's what's giving me anxiety here, right? I don't know if this is going to play out. I'm winging it in my head. But I had a bad experience with the dentist. I'm feeling anxious about this next visit, so I've got that trigger going. The dentist appointment, I've got to set it, and then I've got this pattern, this fear, worry, anxiety that's coming up and running. The tool can be just kind of, good, this is good. I have to will myself to the dentist, right? If I'm afraid to go to the dentist, if I've got this fear engine, this anxiety, you want to take a picture?
Yes.
If I've got a fear engine or it's anxiety, then I have to will myself past that, right? Guess where will comes from? Kidneys. Kidneys. In Chinese, if you look on the chart that I gave you, the kidneys is zhi. It's energy. It's a will. It's a push forward. So it's the opposite of fear. Fear tends to lock us down. Again, going back to the balance. If I have a fear and I can't move past it, I'm paralyzed. That means part of that means my kidneys are exhausted or weak. So I want to work on nourishing the kidneys, strengthening the kidneys, and strengthening my will so that I can move past this obstacle. What?
I was going to say, what if you just make your dentist appointment first thing in the morning when you're half asleep? That's what I do.
That can work. That can work.
Then I just show up and I don't care because I'm tired.
You still had to get there.
True.
So you weren't awake enough to have the energy.
To have the energy to be that anxious.
Right.
So if it's fear, so wisdom comes. So So how do you get out of that? I mean, do you go to wisdom, do you go into mentally and fact finding and all that to get out of the fear?
Well, it starts to get into, when we start to get into the cycle of this, I have worry and instability in the spleen, right? That's pushing into kidney fear, that's then pushing up into heart anxiety or anxiousness, excitement, chaos, okay? So do I trust my dentist? Have I, the last idiot hurt me. Did I go find a new idiot? Or did I find a good dentist, right? Did I go on the Yelp review and get all the, he's only got 5-star ratings and he's been in business for 30 years and he really knows what he's doing? Can I build that engine of trust that then will settle some of the fear? Create some wisdom, maybe? Does that make sense? Which then will start to subdue the anxiety. So, in this scenario, one of the things that I wanted to get to here, and this is as you work to understand, the thing I wanted to get to is the payoff. If I'm in a place of pain, whether it's anxiety, depression, whatever, anger for me, and I'm going to jump metaphors here. Anger for me was a very painful place to be, but it kept me safe. So there was a payoff. So it kept people at distance, but it was a payoff. So until the pain of having people at distance was too great, I was fine. I was fine stewing in that heat. Same thing with anxiety or depression. If I'm in a place where I'm really high-level anxiety, like some of the veterans that I've worked with, the post-traumatic stress, such an intensity, particularly combat veterans, the anxiety helps them feel safe. That high intensity of why am I losing my words? Hypervigilance. Thank you. The hypervigilance that we're creating, that that I'm aware of everything, and everything makes me twitchy, right? What was that noise? What was that? What was that? Creating that environment, that intensity, that was something that was a necessity in a fight or flight mode, particularly when your life is in danger. Get it, totally. The thing is as you're no longer in that situation and you're trying to de-escalate, a very fundamental part of your being is saying, hold the boat. If we're not up here, in this intense state, we are going to be vulnerable. Because for a long period of time, we were. And so coming out of that intense state can be terrifying. And it's not just combat veterans. Anybody can get into this where the anxiety is a protector. It keeps me from feeling vulnerable. It's painful. It sucks. But it's safer than feeling vulnerable. Does that make sense? And so that's the payoff. If we can't recognize that payoff for ourselves, we're going to continue to run the hamster wheel here. And there's now a cat wheel. Have you seen this thing? Have you?
No, but you would have.
I have. It's a wheel. It's like the hamster wheel in the cage. Well, now they have one for cats. And it's like, that's just stupid.
They have treadmills for
My
dogs.
cats run all over the place,
I know, give them a box and let them run, and they pretty much
Yeah,
use
they're just-
themselves forever.
But they're,
I don't
yeah.
know, is it big enough for me?
Pretty soon there'll be a human version.
I'm sure they already have those somewhere.
Treadmills.
Treadmills or those big balls for the kids to play in. Was it? You
I
crawl
just think
inside
so.
of those things. Those to me, I would get claustrophobic in that.
Well, I saw, some of those I saw and I thought, as a medic, I'm like, oh, that's gonna be bad. And I saw somebody jump into a pool and I'm like, drowning victim, okay.
I don't know, that sounds.
Oh, yeah, they do have a hamster wheel on, that goes on water for humans.
Yeah.
I think
No.
humans will
So,
fall for it.
We have one at the ranch.
Humans have the unique
No.
ability,
Yeah.
humans have an amazing, unique ability to come up with very creative ways to hurt themselves. Now that video is there, there's like an extra motivation because I may be a YouTube star.
Right.
So if anxiety is more, is always future focused, am I to assume depression is always past?
Yes.
Is there any scenario where it would be
It depends.
future, like you had up there for the past
Well,
on
if
the
you,
anxiety?
let's play with it, let's see, right? So this time of year for people can be depressive. And what does that depression look like? So give me some ideas. For me, I'll share what I'm feeling right now is the resonance of that cop that lost his life this week that I knew resonated with me on the loss of my mother. It resonated with me on several other losses that happened for me and people, either students that I worked with or friends that died around this time of year over the years. And one in particular that resonated with me was a soldier that I worked with in 2009. Now I think about him from time to time often. There's a picture of him on my desk. And the reason that one was so prevalent, and it kind of fits in what we're talking about with regards to medication. So, you know, for a long time I was working in behavioral health in a critical stabilization unit for active duty military. That's where I met him. Now I met him in October and I worked with him October through November. He got discharged right after Thanksgiving, so we spent Thanksgiving together in the hospital. And he went home to the East Coast. And right around this time, right between, I'm trying to remember whether it was, because it was 10 years ago, trying to remember whether it was right before Christmas or right after Christmas, because in hospital I was there every week anyway. I learned that December 19th of 2009, he had a seizure in front of his two girls and his wife and died in front of them in their living room. Because the pharmacology that he had was not right for him. And the thing that made that one hard for me is I had arguments with his psychiatrist here because I thought he was over-medicated. And because he was a psychiatrist and I was relatively new to the hospital, I pushed, which I will always do, but I didn't push as hard as I would have wanted to. I was the new guy. I was concerned, but according to him, I didn't know what I was talking about. So that one was really, really hard. His name was Reggie. 10th Mountain Division, fought in Afghanistan, had several wounds. I was working with him a lot on chronic pain. But the psychotropics that they gave him, in the intensity that they gave him, and the mix that they gave him, created a seizure. And so anyway, that's one of the ones that's weighing on me right now. But
So we're
so
future,
with resonant frequencies with this, so going into depression, for me, when I have those energies coming in, like I said out on the floor, I don't want to push them aside and say, this is a happy time. It's like, yeah, there's happiness. I've had some joy over the past week or so, but I've also had a lot of pain the past few weeks. And so I want to be able to honor both. I don't want to live in one or the other or pretend that both are fine and everything is, honky-dory. I want to be able to move. If I'm feeling sad, I don't want to wallow. I just want to be present to it and say, okay, where's this coming from? I need to let this emotion out. And then as I settle and I'm enjoying my family, I can spend some time in that space, but I haven't stuffed anything. Does that make sense?
mm-hmm.
So with this, when you're looking at depression as this heavy depression, for me, it feels in the moment, because all those frequencies from the past, or that resident frequency of depression, all the painful events are coming into play. So it's present in the feelings, but it's attached to things that happened in the past. Can somebody look into the future and create a depressive scenario?
Yes.
Is what you're
Because
asking.
they're worried about,
Mhm.
that would be out of fear and history, and fear of history repeating itself then.
Potentially. It
Or
depends
lack
on
of trust in your own, like in your situation, lack of trust. It would be lack of trust in yourself for not speaking up again. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
If you didn't work through it. If you
believe me,
didn't-
this is one of the reasons I speak up now. It's very much one of the reasons why I don't hold my tongue. It's one of the reasons that most psychiatrists don't like me, because I challenge them. And not just to be an ass, but just it's like, I'm not a psychiatrist, I know that, but what I'm seeing in this patient is this. They're lethargic, right? There's an issue here with the medication that's affecting their kidneys and their liver, so let's look at that. Now, some of the psychiatrists that I work with will listen and look and see. They'll do a blood test or something like that, so they're on board. Others are like, oh, peasant, you don't know what you're talking about. Right, but with regards to the depression, yeah, I mean, I would love for you guys to speak up and say, okay, let's look at, can we create depression in the future? Can I look forward into the future and feel depressed about that?
Mm.
I'm open.
Yeah.
It's possible.
But what does that look like? Give me a scenario.
Well, you can, 3 years ago, my husband had, his second cancer. A month later, he had another surgery for radiation damage in the area. He
Health issues.
Yeah, health issues. And here's this big, healthy ex-athlete that's already survived another, prostate cancer 5 years before. And for 2 years, he started getting infection, everything else, and for 2 years, each June, he looked like there was just like, no way he's gonna make it till Christmas, no way. He looked like a 90-year-old man. He was over like this, trying to do his walk. And it was a very depressing period of time for me. This year, he hadn't had an infection in 10 months, it's great, he's standing up straight again because of naturopaths and golfers and chiropractors, and it's different, but totally, one of his friends who was a doctor said, she's in grief, she's grieving already, and grief, and that is projecting like Cheryl said, projecting something into the future, but certainly experiencing it right now. I watched this diminishment of this, my mate's physical body.
Right. Well, what's going on there, I would suggest, is like you said, you're projecting into a future.
All right. Well, and I'm grabbing from the past, and I'm like, this is exactly, okay, he's starting to lose weight, he's starting to do this, I saw that with my mother, I saw that with my father, so you're pulling all these past experiences, but you're projecting on what's gonna happen. He's going there too.
It's also like people who say they'll never get another dog or never get another cat again because of the previous one.
Mhm.
Because they've gone through
They
some
know they
type
have to
of
say
depression
goodbye
of
again.
sadness, yeah,
Mhm.
with them.
Right.
And so they don't want to put themselves through that again, so they never allow themselves to get another cat or a dog,
Right.
or pet, whatever pet it is.
Right.
Only those things that can bring us joy can also bring us sorrow.
Well, I can assure you, we will never own another pig.
I'm not sure how many.
My word on whatever Bible you want.
Kevin Bacon is it, right?
Kevin Bacon is it. Yeah, but if you have it, you've got now focused on fear, worry, anxiety, on future focus, guilt, grief, sadness, regret, resentment, right? Anger. All of these are past focus. They could be 10 seconds ago or it could be 10 years ago. But when you talk about depression into the future, what do we, you bring up a valid question I'd love to explore. If I'm feeling depressed in the future, idiots. If I'm feeling depressed towards the future, that's valid, but where's it really coming from? So I can look at, this Christmas, I'm missing my mom as an example, and maybe my dad is not in the best of health, and I'm, thinking to a time when, well, no, I'll even leave that alone. I was thinking the other day about my mom hasn't seen my boys grow up. She died almost 6 years ago, so she hasn't seen that transition from boy to man that I've seen. She won't see her grandkids, right? So I can look at that scenario and play it out and feel really sad. So I guess in essence that is a depression into the future. But is it really?
I don't see sadness and depression as being the same
You see them as the same?
thing. No.
They're not, that's why they're separate up there. Oh, sorry.
Honestly, honestly, since we all come from someone, we know how, I remember when I lost my grandparents, so to then think, golly, but at least I knew my great-grandmother till she was 13 years old, until I was 13. Yeah, and you can kind of combine all that stuff, golly, I hope I live to see my youngest grandson fall in love, or whatever. But reality, you've seen it, you've experienced it yourself, whenever we lost our grandparents or parents or whatever. Some people lose their parents very young and become parents, and then, you have that same anxiety about, I hope I can be there for mine. It can all come from the past.
I think watch more Hallmark movies, because they just teach you that everybody's
Right.
still around watching over you.
Well, what we're talking about basically is mortality, right?
Yeah. None of us are gonna get out of this alive.
None of us get out of this alive, you're absolutely correct. But when we're faced with it, at whatever stage of life we are, it's very difficult. Because none of us do get out of this alive. And I would suggest that the heaviness of this is rooted in a couple of things for me. Lack of trust in that I don't know what's next. I have some ideas. I've been told a lot of things in all these holy books and stuff, but in my experience, and particularly working with at that point of transition in hospice and such, and I have in my energetic work and Medical Qigong and my training, I've experienced things that I can't explain on this level. So I feel like there's a whole lot more that we don't know, but there's still that we don't know. We can't know here. We have to move over and to know. And move over means taking this vehicle and leaving. So mortality is that ego-centered, oh my God, I'm not going to be here forever. Right? We start to get into all sorts of philosophical range there, but what's at the end of it? The fear, for me, is one. Not as much fear of dying, but fear of not being here for my family and that kind of thing. What's going to happen to them? Fear of missing out on the things that are going to unfold with my boys and that. I don't care so much about the pig, but it's about the boys. And wanting to be there for as much of it as possible. So we get into trust. We start to get into the difference between trust and faith. Because I don't believe they're the same thing. But that's a whole hour discussion all by itself, at least. So have we decided anything, or is depression something that we can...
Is trust internal and faith is external?
Yeah.
Okay.
At least on a basic level, I think
And
that
the way you're
that's,
looking at it, yeah.
in order for me to trust you, I have to trust myself to know you to a level where I can trust you, right? Whereas if I'm, kind of blind faith, I'm just saying it'll all be good.
Right.
So, what have we decided here?
Well, we can get depressed by projecting into the future, but the projection we present is really from our own past experience, or something we've read
There you
about,
go.
or
Yeah.
read about or experienced ourselves. So we're drawing on our own experience, but we then project it into the future. But again, it's just like the other diagram that you did. It's all really based on something that's already happened.
Right, so
We
we're
read
here,
about it.
we're here taking the energy, if you look at it as an energetic signature, right? And we're taking that energetic signature, projecting it into the future, and then experiencing that feeling now.
Mhm.
But it can only be familiar to us from our past experience.
We decided that it's better that the holiday season is coming to an end. And we survived it.
Oh, there it goes, Cheryl, straight at it. Well, I was thinking, as we all live through these life experiences, wherever they are, when we're relating to wisdom, what you find out is that if you have your feet to the fire in all these different kinds of circumstances, it gets you to a place where you really, for me anyway, I work really hard at staying in the middle as much as I possibly can, because I found out when I let it go this way or this way, it didn't work. And the only way you survive is you either succumb or you survive. And the only way you survive is to hit it straight on, figure out what to do, and do as much balance as you can. And try and be as fair and the stand-up person you want to be.
That's some strong kidney energy right there. Some will.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just, let's go.
I mean, I don't present that way most of the time, but that's what you do to get through. And to enjoy life, to be happy.
Mhm. And it's really difficult for me, but truly the only thing we have is right this moment.
Sure.
This class has been wonderful right at this moment. And if I get away from that, that's when I get into these other things. Because if I'm in this moment, I can't, depression is not even something I can experience in this particular moment. Not if it's a fun moment. Now, I could if I was at the dentist, but at this moment.
And that's just sheer terror.
But at this moment, at this very moment, this is, to me, a joyful experience to this moment and what we have right now. And and that's really, that's all that's guaranteed
True.
right now.
But you have to have all of that though, to really appreciate the other.
Yes, it's part of the human
Because
experience.
if you don't have grief or guilt or
Exactly,
depression
Cheryl.
or anger or
You have to
any of that, then you really can't, then you're just sitting zero
Mm-hmm.
and not living.
Mm-hmm.
Like the
Because you
Devon
can't
said.
appreciate the good
Yeah.
times if you don't have the bad times.
Right, if
Yeah.
you
You just can't dwell in them.
I
You know
prefer
what
to-
joy is unless
Yeah.
you know what sadness is.
I prefer
right?
to live.
Yeah.
I don't want to just sit there and not do anything. I'd rather do it.
Go for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have the Wu Ji, Tai Ji, and then back to Wu Ji, right? That's the cycle of life, if you will, from a basic perspective. Our soul comes in to experience the duality of this existence, and then it leaves. Where I think the majority of our discomfort is that our soul, at a base soul level, we know what it feels like to have harmony. And so the more we get out of balance and alignment, the more uncomfortable we become at a soul level. And this is something I've been playing with and trying to understand deeper. But in essence, if you think of the soul as being a perfect expression of energy, then this level of experience does not show perfection. There is nothing on this level that is perfect. As precise as this table was molded, it's not perfect. And even though the table was molded in the same mold as this one, if you look hard enough, there's differences. They're not perfect and they're different from each other. There is no perfection on this level of existence. And so where we get really, really uncomfortable is when we try to measure our experience here with what our soul believes should be.
So it's a perfect soul trying to live in an imperfect world.
Yes,
causing us
thank you for
imperfection.
taking that whole paragraph. No, that was beautiful. It's a perfect soul
was.
trying to live in an imperfect world.
Yes.
Yes. I need to write that down. I guess I get it on video. No, that's good though. That's good. Because this is something I've been trying to come up with some way to express it that doesn't sound woo-woo and fluffy.
You know, but I like that you talk about, because I think sometimes people get very attached to balance and what balance looks like, and they see balance as being in that even perfect space all the time, and that that's what the goal is, as opposed to being able to sit with the fact that what balance really would mean in that duality is this up and down, and being able to accept that, but not have it be the extreme, but be able to stay in that space of coming up and down.
I've had the pleasure of working with people that have no want for anything in this life. All the money, comfortable existence, they don't have to work, they can play, they can do whatever the hell they want, and they're just as miserable as the rest of us.
Right.
They are. Because that's the nature of this life. It's like we have, grass is always greener, right?
Right.
Yes.
And so we have, and then we look and go, that looks better than what I've got. Let's go over here and look at that. You know? And in this world we live in, particularly right now with all of the inundation of commercialization and everything we have is yesterday's news, and we have to get something new because that's the only way to be okay. We lean on things outside of ourselves to strengthen our position in life, to feel better. And that's really, you know, like one term for it is retail shopping. I mean, retail therapy.
Yes, right.
But that's not any different than this.
Right.
I have a pain and I comfort it with a new pair of shoes or new clothes or new car or whatever. And you get a new car. And you get a new
That's your tool.
Yeah. So it can be that, it can be drugs, it can be sex, it can be fighting, it could be whatever that's clamping things down. We're not, you know, the goal is to live as close to now as possible. Because this is where there is no suffering, this is peace. The more present I am, mind, emotions, body, the more fully present I am, the more peace I have. And that's taught by all of the philosophers, all of the religious teachers. Same thing.
I think this is why those of us who like being in out of doors, you find that connection just with the earth, with nature, and the cycles that go on, and the struggles that to make the balance in nature.
Well, you know why nature,
With weather, yeah.
you know why nature is such a nourishing place? There's a lot of different layers to this. Oxygen for one, sunshine for another. But just, it doesn't matter to me if it's raining, if it's
Yes.
miserable, if I'm outside, if I'm camping, I'm outside, I'm happy. The reason nature is, to me, is really powerful as a healing tool is because when you're in nature, you're in the present moment. If you're really in nature, if you're sitting, if you're walking a trail and a bird gets your attention and you're listening to the bird song, or you see, like the other day I was in the backyard doing Qigong and this massive hawk, and I'm not kidding, she had to be about that big, just nestled in a tree up there, and I
She
caught
had
a
the
glimpse
nest
of it.
up there.
No, she was just hanging out in the tree, And I was like, where's the cat? I had to go put the cat inside, so she's like, she's not coming for me, but I have a feeling she's like, I wonder if a little Salisbury dressing or maybe a little ranch on that one. Okay. So when we're in nature and we're present, that's peace. Qigong, the reason it gives us peace to do this kind of practice is because we're engaging our whole being in that practice. Breath, movement, and intention, the three pillars of Qigong: breath, movement, and intention. I'm quieting my mind, I'm present to my body, and I'm letting my emotions settle. That's the power of this type of practice. All right, other questions? Thank you guys for your time and attention.
It's a good class.
Yeah.
Have a happy, wonderful New Year, and I'll see you next Friday.
Mhm.
Hopefully.